In early September 2023, the young couple Evan and Lydia Turner vanished without a trace on a treacherous trail in Rocky Mountain National Park. For a full year, they were presumed dead victims of harsh weather, a slip into a glacier, or getting lost deep in the forest. But then in September 2024, Evan suddenly walked into a small town dozens of miles from the park, alive, but traumatized, exhausted, and unable to remember how the past 12 months had passed. What he told investigators when he was finally able to speak sent chills down the spines of even the most experienced rangers. Where had he been for that entire year, and what really happened to Lydia? You'll find out in this video. Some names and details have been changed to protect identities and privacy. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. An early autumn morning in Rocky Mountain National Park opened with the characteristic stillness of Colorado's high country, where cold air seemed to creep out from rock crevices, and a thin mist draped an opaque veil over the lakes, the deep plunging valleys, and the straight trunks of pines that rose like pillars holding up the sky. The first sunlight, weak and pale, struggled to pierce the thin clouds hanging over the peaks, creating a dim, ethereal glow that made the entire forest feel as though it were drifting through a morning half awake, half dreaming. Wind whistled long through the granite boulders, each gust carrying the rustle of millions of dry leaves, forming a natural symphony that was both gentle and faintly eerie. In that majestic yet chilling landscape, Evan Turner and Lydia Turner appeared at the entrance to Glacier Gorge with the relaxed demeanor of people accustomed to long trails. They carried small backpacks, trekking poles, and a few personal items light enough to spend the whole day exploring paths that wound deep into the woods. The crisp air made them pull their collars up slightly, but their steps remained steady and confident as they began moving inward. At that moment, no one, not even they themselves, could have known that the next few hours would become one of the strangest mysteries ever to occur in Rocky Mountain. As the sun climbed higher, they entered a narrow section of trail where trees grew thick, trunks covered in green moss, and canopies interwoven like a gateway leading down into the fathomless depths of the forest. A solo hiker was the last person to see them. He remembered the moment clearly. Evan walking ahead, calmly checking a handheld map, while Lydia followed close behind her husband, repeatedly glancing back as if checking for something. In the pale light, Lydia's face appeared inexplicably tense. She blinked rapidly, gripped her trekking pole tighter than usual, and for one brief instant her eyes met the hiker's, an expression not of overt fear, but as if she were trying to conceal some private worry. The hiker didn't hear them speak, but he recalled that the wind was blowing stronger then, bringing with it an odd silence, as though the forest were quietly watching them walk deeper in. Just minutes later, Evan and Lydia disappeared around a bend in the trail, where massive pine trunks completely blocked the view. That was the last time anyone saw them on the Glacier Gorge Trail. The afternoon darkened faster than expected. Thick fog enveloped the area, obscuring even the mountain ridges. By full nightfall, their family began calling as usual to check if the hike was going smoothly. But both phones only rang, no one answered. They tried texting, calling dozens of times, reaching out through location-sharing apps. Everything was futile. The first hours passed with hope that the couple might simply be in an area without cell service. But as time dragged on, unease began to spread. By the time night fully covered the range, cold winds intensified and temperatures dropped near freezing. The family could no longer tolerate the unnatural silence. In growing worry, and the feeling that something was truly wrong, they called the National Park Service to report that Evan and Lydia Turner were missing inside Rocky Mountain. The peaceful morning had passed, but the silence of that evening became the prelude to a mystery no one could have foreseen. When the missing persons call reached the National Park Service headquarters, the clock had already passed midnight, the early autumn chill sinking deep into every valley and thick fog still clinging to the rocky slopes. But at Rocky Mountain, emergencies like this were not rare, and the search protocol was activated almost immediately. The two rangers on night duty, veterans, used to receiving unusual reports in the middle of the night, immediately contacted the nearest patrol team to send people to the Glacier Gorge trailhead, where Evan and Lydia were confirmed to have started their hike. The parking area was now completely empty, lit only by faint lights casting shadows on rows of dark pines. Cold wind blew through, creating sounds like distant calls echoing in the mountains. Ranger Tom Shaver and Assistant Ranger Megan Ortiz were the first to arrive. They didn't expect to find anything specific in such thick darkness, but procedure required verifying whether the couple had left any clear sign of departing the area or returning in the evening. Evan's silver-gray Subaru Outback remained parked quietly in the eastern corner of the lot, covered in a thin layer of frost on the windshield. But beyond that detail, the trailhead offered almost nothing. There were no obvious physical traces on the cold ground. No litter, no flashlight beams or movement in the woods. Hikers who stayed out past regulation hours usually turned on lights, talked loudly, or left fresh footprints. But here, everything seemed completely swallowed. This wasn't unusual for a cold early autumn night, but it didn't help in determining Evan and Lydia's direction. After checking the vehicle and surrounding area, Ranger Megan keyed the radio and reported to headquarters. No sign of return. Trailhead completely empty. No movement. Her voice sounded softly through the device, stretched by the wind sweeping across the tree canopy. On paper, this was still considered a missing persons case of unknown cause. Perhaps they were simply lost, perhaps exhausted and sheltering somewhere along the trail. Perhaps they had found a spot out of the wind. Such possibilities were not uncommon. Glacier Gorge had seen several cases of hikers stuck overnight who returned safely the next morning. At this stage, no one considered crime or foul play. Every step was based on the assumption that Evan and Lydia might be trying to find their way back, or temporarily sheltering somewhere on the trail. About an hour later, a second ranger team was dispatched to cover the initial section of Glacier Gorge, where the terrain was still relatively flat and manageable. Using high-powered flashlights and basic tracking techniques, they swept both sides of the path for even the smallest signs: fresh boot prints, scraps of fabric, slide marks, or remnants of a rest stop. But thick fog and moisture condensing on the ground blurred every trace, as if the weather were deliberately erasing clues. At one fork, Ranger Barrett paused for a long time to examine a crushed leaf, as if someone had just stepped on it. But upon closer inspection with the light, it was only the mark of a naturally broken branch, likely from strong afternoon winds. Barrett sighed and continued. Later, the search expanded to several spots where hikers often stopped to rest or drink water. No fire traces, no freshly compressed soil from sitting, no bottle caps. The scene was too quiet. Some rangers began to feel uneasy, not from suspecting anything sinister, but because this kind of emptiness often meant losing the trail very early, making the search many times harder. Near 4 in the morning, as temperatures dropped to near freezing, the search team withdrew to a temporary command post to compile observations. There was not a single definitive sign of Evan and Lydia's location. They had left no breadcrumbs, no reports of cries for help, no flashlight beams in the night, and no other hikers had seen them leave the area. A veteran ranger murmured, "If they were just lost or exhausted, there'd at least be boot prints or calls. Tonight is too quiet." But even that comment was not entered into the official report. In rescue protocol, suspicion is only allowed to begin when time and evidence suggest it. For now, they remained in the search and verification phase. No one was permitted to speculate the worst. As the sun began to rise behind Long's Peak, casting the first light into Glacier Gorge Valley, additional search teams prepared to head out. Daytime searching would be more effective, and the rangers believed they could pick up tracks. But despite the lingering hope, everyone sensed that the time since Evan and Lydia vanished was already long enough to make everything unpredictable. The initial search concluded without a single definitive trace. Rocky Mountain seemed to guard all its secrets that first night, and they would have to dig much deeper the next day to uncover what really happened to Evan and Lydia Turner. As the first light of dawn slid down the mountain slopes and fell into Glacier Gorge Valley, the search team was ready to return to the trailhead for the critical next step, determining the LKP last known point, the final location where Evan and Lydia Turner were seen. This is always the key phase in any search at Rocky Mountain, because the treacherous terrain and sudden weather changes can turn even a small error into a misdirected rescue operation. Shortly after assembling, Ranger Megan Ortiz announced that the hiker believed to be the last person to see the couple had proactively contacted them again early that morning and agreed to return to the scene to provide more detailed description. The man's name was Colin Avery, 42 years old, from Fort Collins. He was a regular solo weekend hiker with a habit of remembering trail details very precisely, a habit that rangers always appreciated in missing persons cases. Colin met the search team right at the head of the Glacier Gorge Trail. He was wearing a thin jacket, holding a steaming cup of coffee, but his eyes showed a tension that Ranger Tom Shaver recognized immediately, the sign of someone who knew that what they had seen might be a crucial piece in a story no one wanted to hear. When asked to retrace the section of trail where he encountered Evan and Lydia, Colin began moving slowly, each step deliberate as if replaying his own memory. He described how the sky was still bright at that time. The mist had started to lift, and the trail was so narrow that it only allowed 2 people to walk single file. The rangers following behind listened to every detail, noting everything from the wind direction to the moisture on the ground and the way light filtered through the canopy. Anything that could help narrow down the LKP. At the second bend, Colin stopped, tilting his head slightly forward as if fixing the image in his mind. "Right here," he said, pointing to a section of trail constricted by 2 large pine trunks growing close together. "I saw them coming toward me. Evan was in front, and she, Lydia, was right behind." He was looking at a map or his phone, and she looked at me, then looked back behind them, like someone was there, but I didn't see anyone. Ranger Ortiz asked for more detail. "Did you hear them say anything? Did it seem like they were arguing or discussing the route?" Colin shook his head. "No. Just the wind, and very light footsteps." The way he described that silence made a few rangers on the team frown slightly. On sections like this, hikers usually chat, even laugh. But if they were completely silent, either they were focused because they were lost, or something else was on their minds. Colin continued, leading everyone down another few dozen meters. He stopped at a curve with a view opening to a low rock wall on the right and thick pines on the left. "They kept going in there," he said. "After this bend, I couldn't see them anymore. Just heard the wind getting stronger." Ranger Tom marked the spot with GPS, then asked everyone to fan out and check the ground surface around it. No one expected to find clear footprints after hours of nighttime dew had wet the earth. But any small detail, a slight soil slide, a blade of grass bent and broken, could confirm the couple's direction of travel. While the rangers swept the area, Colin shared one more thing he had remembered while driving back to his hotel the previous night. "There was a strange moment. Right after I passed them by a few meters, I heard a heavy sound, like someone stumbling on a rock. I turned around, but only saw forest and mist. Didn't see them anymore. But I thought, maybe, they had just switched positions." This information was immediately recorded in the report. Though not conclusive, it suggested another possibility. Lydia might have slipped or tripped on something right after they rounded the bend. When the entire group returned to the point Colin described as the last place he saw them, Lead Ranger Shaver looked around for a long time. The space here had an unusual silence. Even though it was morning, light still struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, creating the feeling that this spot was always lower, darker than other sections of trail. There was a heaviness hanging in the air, the kind that those with years of rescue experience all recognize, the sense of a place where traces are swallowed by time and nature far too quickly. Shaver then marked this location as the temporary LKP, from which to expand the search in a fan pattern. To ensure nothing was missed, the SAR team split into 3 groups covering 3 different directions. One group continued along the main Glacier Gorge Trail. One checked down toward the low rock areas near the valley, and the remaining group searched the forest edge, where the terrain was still relatively flat. Establishing the LKP not only helped direct the search, but also defined the area where the couple might have encountered difficulty or changed their route. And most importantly, this was the place the rangers knew for certain they had actually reached a single anchor point in a vast forest with far too many possibilities. As Colin left, Ranger Megan thanked him once more. She knew that without his precise account, The search would be like looking for a needle in a sea of trees. Now, at least, they had a starting mark. A final point where Evan and Lydia Turner were still within human sight, before vanishing into a place left only with wind, mist, and the cold canopies of Rocky Mountain. The first full day of searching officially began from here, with the LKP established and dozens of directions to cover ahead. Immediately after the LKP was plotted on the map and circled with temporary markers, the entire rescue team entered the official search phase within the first 24 hours. The phase always considered most critical for any missing persons case in Rocky Mountain National Park. In a place where terrain can change in just a few steps and weather can shift in minutes, every hour carried life or death meaning. From early morning, the K9 teams were deployed first. 3 dogs, specially trained to track human scent, were brought to the LKP. Ranger Megan pulled from evidence storage the light jacket Evan had worn when leaving the lodge that day. It still carried the faint smell of fabric softener and the distinctive scent of the detergent the couple used at home. The K9s were each allowed to sniff the jacket before starting to move. But just minutes later, the first difficulty appeared. Strong wind continuously blowing in the opposite direction, pulling scent layers backward and scattering them in the air before the dogs could lock on. One dog named Shadow started nosing the ground, moving southwest, the opposite direction from what was expected. But after only a few dozen meters, it stopped, turned back to look at its handler with a confused expression. The handler sighed. "The winds wiped everything clean. We'll have to wait until it shifts." At Rocky Mountain, this was not uncommon. The Rangers had witnessed searches dragging on for days simply because of persistent headwinds. Wind not only masked scent but also scattered dirt and rocks, erased boot prints, and caused branches to break and fall, covering spots that might otherwise show signs. When the K9s could not yet provide a clear direction, the drone team was brought in. 2 small but high-resolution camera and thermal sensor-equipped drones were flown over the area above the LKP. From above, the pine forest stretched endlessly like a dark green sea, wind sweeping hard and making the canopies sway in waves. Glacier Gorge from overhead looked like a deep gash, with sheer rock walls and long sloping sides. This was the most challenging part. If Evan and Lydia had fallen into one of these areas, spotting them with the naked eye was nearly impossible. However, the drones detected no unusual thermal signatures, no human shapes, no large movement, no odd hotspots against the cold ground temperature. Meanwhile, the sun climbed higher, and the morning mist gradually cleared, allowing the drones to see farther. But it remained an endless expanse of forest and rock. A ranger monitoring the drone feed murmured, "If they were still alive and moving, the thermal camera would have picked it up." No one replied. At this stage, hope did not rest on words, but on every small detail, and the most important thing was that nothing had been found yet. By mid-morning, the helicopter team was deployed. An NPS helicopter flew low along the valley, slowly sweeping over steep rock fields, forest edges, and high-risk zones. At this altitude, the pilot had to maneuver carefully to avoid gusts off the rock walls. Updrafts from the stone faces made the rotors vibrate strongly, creating a deep, rumbling echo through the valley like a prolonged low growl. From the helicopter, the observing ranger used thermal binoculars to try to peer into areas the drones could not reach: small ledges, thick tree overhangs, or deep-shadowed recesses in the forest. But all he saw was the deep green of trees and the cold gray of rock. Meanwhile, the ground teams continued expanding their sweep. They used probing poles to check each area near the LKP. Trail edges, fallen tree trunks, low rock crevices. No unusual soil slides, no scrape marks on stone, no fabric scraps, bottle caps, or anything suggesting Evan and Lydia had stopped or had an incident here. Weather began shifting around early afternoon. Wind eased, but fog rolled back in, thicker than the morning. Low gray clouds reduced visibility significantly. Ranger Shaver had to order the drones grounded because they could no longer operate safely in such limited conditions. The K9 team tried again, this time using Lydia's jacket, but encountered the same issue: scent blown off course or dispersed, causing the dogs to run only a few meters before circling back. By around 3 in the afternoon, the atmosphere grew heavier. Temperature dropped suddenly despite it still being daylight. Signs of light rain appeared, tiny droplets starting to fall on the ground, softening the soil and coating the rocks with a layer of moisture. This only accelerated the erasure of any initial traces, if they had existed, in just minutes. A younger ranger, on his first search in such harsh conditions, said quietly over the radio, "We're following every procedure correctly, but nature is working against us." That statement perfectly summed up the situation the rescue team faced. Heat, wind, fog, rain, all concealing whatever story had unfolded before. Throughout the afternoon, the search team continuously swept the small paths leading down to the lower rock areas, meter by meter. A few spots looked as though someone had passed through recently, but upon closer inspection, they were only animal tracks or soil eroded by strong winds. All natural shelter spots, concave rock ledges, crevices, massive tree trunks, were thoroughly checked. Nothing. As dusk fell for the second time since Evan and Lydia went missing, the light in the forest turned murky and cold. A quick meeting was held at the temporary field command post, and everyone agreed that the first 24 hours had yielded no definitive signs. No traces of movement, no major physical evidence, no leads from the K9S, no unusual heat signatures from drones or the helicopter. Night fell, and the rangers set up additional signal lights along the trail in case the couple managed to find their way back on their own. But as everyone packed up equipment and quietly withdrew to the command station, no one voiced the feeling growing inside them, the sense that the Turners had stepped into a part of the land where nature did not want to reveal answers too easily. The first 24 hours passed in vain, and the search still had many unpredictable challenges ahead. The morning of the second search day began with a thick layer of fog covering the ground, so dense that the rangers had to turn on flashlights, even though it was already light out. White beams swept through the canopies and dark pine trunks, creating faint streaks of light that seemed to hang in the cold air. Everyone understood that the lack of clear signs in the first 24 hours had made the search far more difficult, but no one intended to give up. As the mist gradually lifted, the SAR groups fanned out in the 3 directions already established from the previous day's LKP. They moved cautiously, marking their paths with orange tape to avoid retracing steps or missing areas. The trails around Glacier Gorge always held terrain surprises. Scattered boulders, small streams suddenly cutting across, and sections of forest so dense that light was nearly swallowed whole. It was in one such area, about an hour after splitting up, that Ranger Barrett stopped abruptly. He knelt beside a large pine trunk where the needle layer had been disturbed, as if something had fallen and then been blown sideways by the wind. Beneath the golden needles, he spotted something faintly reflecting the light. A small fabric item, dark in color, wedged between 2 twisted roots. "Got something here," Barrett called softly over the radio, not wanting to disturb the surrounding area before checking. His team members quickly approached. When he used long tongs to lift the covering needles, a piece of fabric became clear. A thin glove, the kind often used for early cold, but not thick enough for strong winds at high altitude. Its color, black with gray, made it easy to blend into the environment, perhaps why no one had spotted it the previous evening. What caught Barrett's attention was not just the glove's presence but its location. The spot where he stood lay below a steep rocky slope. Reaching it from the LKP required crossing a narrow trail section, then turning onto a natural path that was hard to see among closely growing trees. This was not a place ordinary hikers would easily enter, unless intentionally or accidentally pulled off the main route. Lead Ranger Shaver arrived immediately after the report. He observed the scene for several minutes, touching nothing except the pen in his hand for notes. The first thing he did was mark the area with GPS and order a cordon taped off to ensure no one crossed the original perimeter. "Don't jump to conclusions about whose it is," Shaver reminded the team. That was not just professional protocol. It was necessary caution when there was no confirming evidence that the glove actually belonged to Evan or Lydia. The glove was placed in a clear evidence bag and sealed immediately to avoid losing scent samples or picking up new contaminants from the environment. One team member quietly said, "At least it's something." But even that comment carried no relief. It felt more like an acknowledgement that this was the first and only piece in a puzzle that was far too large and far too vague. After securing the evidence, the SAR group began expanding the search around the area, this time much more thoroughly. They probed every tree trunk, every boulder, every fallen branch cluster. Another subgroup was sent to look for possible drop points for the item, because if the glove had fallen during movement or been blown down by wind, it could indicate the couple's direction of travel. Sometimes, in missing persons cases at Rocky Mountain, small items like gloves, headscarves, or water bottle caps could form a breadcrumb trail to help SAR narrow the scope. But in this case, the glove lay alone, with nothing else nearby. That unsettled people more than it gave hope. Ranger Megan studied the terrain and offered an assessment. If Lydia, or Evan, had left the glove here, it was very likely they had moved off the main trail, perhaps from getting lost, perhaps to avoid strong winds higher up, or perhaps drawn by a path that looked easier. Whatever the reason, it was clear they had entered a more inaccessible forest zone, where few people ventured, and where searching became far more dangerous. The mood in the group grew heavier as everyone realized the implications of this find. It was not evidence they were safe. It only proved the couple had been here an area where, without experience or if tired, panicked, or caught in sudden bad weather, they could very easily become trapped. Shaver ordered the K9 team back to the area with the glove for scent. Though he knew constantly shifting winds could make tracking futile, they had to try. But just like the day before, the dogs followed the scent only a few meters before losing direction. The morning chill, combined with damp soil smell and strong wind, made every effort exponentially harder. When the drone team returned to the sky over the newly marked area, the fog had thinned, but tree shadows still created many dark zones hard to observe. Still, the map now had its first marked point. A new starting point, opening the possibility that the Turners had moved deeper northwest, where terrain grew complex and trails disappeared entirely. In his end-of-morning notes, Ranger Shaver wrote a short line. First trace, unknown ownership, located off main trail. Significance, high. The first sign had appeared. It resolved nothing, answered no questions. But it proved one thing. Evan and Lydia had gone into an area they should not have entered. And from here, the search was no longer simple. It was becoming a journey into the forest that Rocky Mountain deliberately hid from human eyes. The afternoon of the second search day was devoted almost entirely to expanding information gathering, and one of the most important data sources in Rocky Mountain National Park is the trail camera system. Automatic cameras scattered throughout remote areas to monitor wildlife. For SAR, they sometimes become the only eyes watching places humans cannot easily reach. Right after the glove was discovered and secured, Ranger Shaver directed a small team back to the control station to retrieve data from the series of cameras near the LKP and surrounding areas. Trail camera data is not always useful, because they trigger on motion, and motion in the forest is endless. Elk passing by, squirrels running, falling leaves from rain are enough to record a few seconds of footage. But sometimes, these cameras capture what ground search teams cannot see. At Rocky Mountain, there have been plenty of missing persons cases where the first clue was found thanks to a camera placed miles from the scene. So no one underestimated their value. When the team in charge opened the first video files, the screen showed familiar images. Moose crossing, a black bear curiously looking straight into the lens, a few foxes darting past. All normal. But when they moved to the fourth camera, the one mounted on a large pine in the forest branch west of the LKP, the group suddenly fell silent. On the screen, in a grainy and dark frame because it was recorded late afternoon, 3 human figures appeared moving through a narrow path between 2 large boulders. The clip was only about 4 seconds long, but clear enough to see 3 silhouettes. 2 walking ahead, 1 behind, taller and several meters back. Ranger Megan immediately asked to slow it down. When zooming in frame by frame, the first 2 figures looked like they were carrying backpacks and using trekking poles, very possibly Evan and Lydia. Faces could not be seen clearly, but the build and movement matched. The third figure was completely different. Taller, no trekking poles, and moving unlike a hiker, no rhythmic climbing motion. Instead, the third silhouette moved more slowly, seemingly maintaining deliberate distance. What caught the Rangers' attention most was the timestamp. The frame was captured the afternoon the couple disappeared. No one could confirm it was them, but the coincidence was too great to ignore. The trail camera had no audio, so everything was silent footage, lightly grainy from low light. Swaying branches made the frame shake slightly, making the third figure even more indistinct. Still, most of the team watching the screen felt uneasy, viewing that clip, the feeling of seeing something that should not have been there. While additional camera data was being extracted, on the eastern edge of the search area, a new witness emerged. It was a young hiker named Rachel Milton, who had been camping near the lock on the day Evan and Lydia vanished. Upon hearing about the search, she came straight to the command post to provide information she had hesitated about, unsure if it was relevant. Rachel said that late that afternoon, while sitting by her camp stove boiling water, she heard a very short, sharp cry carried away by the wind, like metal dropping on rock. At first, she thought it was a startled deer or some other animal, but what stuck with her was that it did not sound like any animal noise she had heard before. The cry lasted less than a second, but the tone was unmistakably human. A sudden, quick sound whose direction she could not pinpoint. She stood up and looked around, but that afternoon, the fog was thick, and despite trying, she saw nothing but white haze drifting through the pine branches. The Rangers questioned Rachel closely about the sound's direction. She pointed west, where the forest grew denser, and trails began to disappear. Even more coincidentally, that was the same direction where the glove had been found. Ranger Shaver recorded the information carefully. In his mind, neither the camera footage nor the hiker's account was enough to conclude anything, but two independent factors. The video of three figures and the mysterious cry both pointed toward the remote area west of the LKP. That could not be ignored. The atmosphere in the field command post grew somber. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood that the search was starting to shift into a more complicated direction. There was no clear evidence that Evan and Lydia had been followed by someone, nor was there evidence that the third figure in the video was connected to their disappearance. But when everything was placed side by side, the direction of movement, the evidence found in an unexpected place, the mysterious cry, and the footage of three silhouettes, the entire picture began to show dark patches that were hard to explain. However, following proper protocol, Ranger Shaver maintained a cautious stance. Until there is clear evidence, he reminded the team, we are still handling a search, not a criminal investigation. And so another piece was added, faint but impossible to ignore. A trail camera with three silhouettes, a witness who heard a cry, and a shadowy forest area where all traces seemed to lead in the same direction. The search was no longer the repetitive footsteps of the previous day. It was moving deeper into a region where nature and weather seemed intent on hiding something. On the morning of the third day, as the command team reviewed the trail camera data and hiker Rachel Milton's account, a major decision was made. Expand the search westward and northwest, where the faint signs suggested Evan and Lydia might have headed. This was far more rugged terrain than the main Glacier Gorge Trail, an area only experienced hikers or those accidentally off course would enter. The area map was immediately spread out on a folding table in the middle of the field command post. Lead Ranger Shaver used a red marker to circle the entire dense forest zone, sloping rock fields, and the path leading higher toward Chaos Canyon, then continued marking the route up to Timberline Falls, and finally the glacier section above. We won't miss anything, Shaver said, his voice firm but heavy. Even the smallest sign. As soon as the group set out, the terrain immediately became a challenge. Flat trail sections vanished quickly, giving way to large rock fields where every step could slip if not careful. The ground here also changed depending on weather. The previous night had brought mist and light rain, making the morning rocks slicker than usual. Trees grew thick, with large twisted roots protruding from the soil like natural traps. As the SAR groups fanned out in the direction set from the LKP, Ranger Megan and two others began advancing toward a natural path leading higher, where only massive boulders lay interspersed. This was not the main trail. There were no signs that hikers regularly passed through, But based on where the glove was found and the direction the third figure in the trail camera footage moved, this was the most likely route. After about an hour climbing natural rock steps, Megan stopped abruptly. Ahead of her, beneath a boulder split in two by weathering, was a faint scratch on the thin soil layer recently disturbed by wind. It was not very clear, but enough to draw attention. A long line, followed by a streak of disturbed earth, as if something or someone had tried to regain balance, or slipped on the rock face and instinctively dragged a hand through the dirt. "Looks like someone veered off in a fall here," Megan said quietly over the radio. The remaining rangers immediately marked the area and conducted a closer inspection. The scratch extended to a point where the rock face steepened sharply, and from there continued down to a lower patch covered in pine needles. No blood, no torn clothing, but this scratch did not resemble an animal mark. It was straight and long in the length of a human arm rather than claw marks. While Megan's group focused on the scratch, the second group, led by Ranger Barrett, approached a higher rock slope where wind blew strongest, and the view opened across the entire Glacier Gorge Valley. Here, at the edge of a large rock ledge, Barrett spotted something caught under the base of a low pine bush. A thin strip of fabric cord, appearing to have been stretched before snapping. He used gloved hands to lift it and examine. The color matched the lightweight reinforcement cords often used on travel backpacks. No logo, no distinctive features, but its location made no sense. This was not a spot hikers typically stop to rest. Wind was very strong, ground uneven, and one wrong step could lead to sliding down the rock slope. "Looks like wind blew it here?" a younger ranger asked. Barrett shook his head. "No. If wind carried it, it wouldn't be caught here. It was pulled or dropped from above." He marked the spot, secured the cord strip, and reported back to command. To him, individual small fabric pieces in the forest could be random, but the number of signs was increasing along a clear directional line, all lying on a path moving farther from the main trail. In the opposite direction, near the edge of Chaos Canyon, the third group discovered a torn shoe insole wedged between two boulders. It looked worn and battered, but not completely rotted. Strangely, its size and style matched the type of hiking shoes Lydia typically wore on long trips. Though it could not be confirmed immediately, it made the search team pause. Something like an insole does not easily fall out unless the shoe was pulled hard, caught on a large obstacle, or worn down from continuous use in bad conditions. At this point, all three groups reported back to command simultaneously. 3 physical signs scattered but aligned along a single axis, extending from the LKP up to the edge of Chaos Canyon, a place ordinary hikers had no reason to reach unless lost or affected by weather conditions. No single trace was strong enough to determine what happened to Evan and Lydia, but it was clear they had gone much farther from safer areas than initially predicted. The pieces of evidence appeared one by one like fragments of an interrupted journey, each small part contributing to show that the couple had moved into a dangerous and hard-to-access zone, where terrain and weather intertwined to form a maze that even seasoned rangers approached with caution. As the rangers gathered to compile the end-of-day report, wind on the peak still whistled in long gusts and the sky seemed to darken faster than usual. The evidence items were laid out neatly on the table. The glove, the insole piece, the backpack cord strip, photos of the soil scratch. Nothing was an answer, but everything pointed the way. And the most notable entry in that day's final report was the line ranger Shaver wrote in strong pen strokes, not hiding his concern. "All signs lead uphill, not accidental terrain. They were moving or being moved into harder ground." The search had entered a new level. From scattered signs, the rangers were beginning to see a path, a direction of travel that Evan and Lydia seemed to have chosen or been forced to follow, leading straight into the most treacherous land in Rocky Mountain. The morning of the 4th day in the search operation began with an important technical meeting at the field command post. After a series of physical signs were discovered in the rugged terrain northwest of the LKP from the glove, the insole piece, the fabric cord strip, to the unusual soil scratch, lead ranger Shaver requested the NPS specialist team coordinate with an expert from the Colorado Search and Rescue Association to assess the possibility of a natural accident. This was not an emotional decision but a required step in every search. Before suspecting any other possibility, the SAR team had to simulate whether Evan and Lydia could have accidentally met harm due to terrain or weather factors. The main expert brought in was Dr. Martin Hale, a terrain and missing person movement behavior specialist who had participated in analyzing dozens of lost hiker cases in Western national parks. He had a calm demeanor, sharp eyes, and the ability to read terrain like an open map. Upon arriving at the scene, he requested all collected evidence be laid out on a large table under cover, then reviewed each sample, each discovery location, and the assumed movement direction day by day. Based on initial information, the first simulation he proposed testing was the possibility of taking a wrong turn. Glacier Gorge is an area with many natural branches, one of which runs toward steep rocks and sloping ground, the direction where the scattered evidence was found. If they turned wrong, they would go deep into difficult terrain, Hale said. This terrain forces hikers to take unusual steps, more prone to slipping, and can lead to a chain of incidents. This sounded reasonable on the surface, but the issue was the alignment of the evidence. Hale requested examination of the glove's discovery location. It lay on a slope below a large rock cluster. If Lydia dropped the glove while slipping, it might lie near the slip point, but the search team had checked that area earlier. No clear soil slide, no rock scrape marks strong enough to indicate a serious fall. If there had been a slip causing injury, it would usually leave direct traces. Next, he examined the torn shoe insole found near the edge of Chaos Canyon. This was a much more dangerous location, with a steep incline and high risk of falling. However, Hale pointed to the elevation of the area and said, "An insole tearing out like this is usually due to the shoe impacting hard, being pulled, or snagging on something in a backward pull. But here there are no markers matching a sideways yank." According to him, an insole detaching from the shoe during a fall off a cliff is very unlikely. In most cases, shoes get damaged in other ways, rarely separating the insole completely. What was most puzzling was the fabric cord strip Barrett found caught in the low pine bush on the rock ledge. In an accident simulation, if a hiker was jerked by wind or slipped, the cord could snag. But the way it was caught showed it moving from above downward, not from below upward or across, prompting Hale to ask, why would an item drop from the upper descent into an area with almost no path? Hale requested all GPS data, slope maps, and that day's wind conditions be brought up on the display. Looking at the results, he pointed out the surprise. Wind speed at the highest area in the afternoon when Evan and Lydia vanished was not strong enough to blow a heavy item like the cord strip, and the primary wind direction was from east to west, the opposite of what would have lodged the cord in the bush. "The evidence does not fit an accident," he said directly, without hedging. "The glove could have been dropped. But 3 pieces of evidence scattered along a single movement axis is not random. If they were lost, they would try to find their way back or head down to lower ground. But here, everything seems to go the opposite way. They went upward." Ranger Shaver nodded. This was also what had been troubling him since the previous day. Hikers in natural accidents usually seek lower ground, not higher, especially in cold and strong wind conditions. Moving into higher terrain where glaciers, rock fields, and dangerous cliffs lie was very different behavior from those accidentally off course. Hale continued simulating the possibility of an intentional slip or being pushed, but he stressed that no conclusion could yet be drawn. He only affirmed one thing. If this is a pure accident, the evidence would lie along a natural fall path. Here, the fall path is not natural, a younger ranger asked. Could they have split up and one tried a different route? Hale shook his head immediately. If they split, there would be footprints or separate movement traces. But from what has been collected, everything lies along a continuous axis, as if someone was pulling along the movement line. The room fell silent when he said that. No one wanted to hypothesize too early, and no one was allowed to. NPS regulations always require, before considering any human factor possibility, natural causes must be completely ruled out. But at this moment, facing the terrain reality and evidence locations, Hale only said very cautiously but clearly, if this is an accident, then it is an unusual accident. The search team understood that this judgment concluded nothing, but it made one thing clear. The natural accident hypothesis did not explain everything. And that was the first time in the search that a chill ran down many people's spines, not from the wind, but because they realized the couple, Evan and Lydia Turner, might not have faced only nature. They might have faced something else deep in Rocky Mountain. That afternoon, as Dr. Martin Hale's report was compiled into the search file, the field command team began to notice something they had tried to avoid thinking about for the past 3 days. The collected evidence did not match any natural accident simulation. Being unable to explain it by terrain or weather did not mean there was a criminal element, but it opened a gray area, a zone of suspicion that the SAR team had to consider even though they could not yet act in a criminal direction. Ranger Megan Ortiz spread the terrain map on the large table, next to photos of each piece of evidence. She used a pen to mark the discovery locations of the glove, insole, fabric cord strip, and soil scratch. When connecting the points, a zigzagging line appeared, but what made everyone frown was that the direction of these signs did not match the route lost hikers typically take. "This is not a downward path," Megan said quietly. "This is upward, into steeper rock, colder, and harder to escape." Ranger Barrett leaned in to observe. If they panicked, they might run in any direction. Hale shook his head. Lost people usually seek lower ground. Human instinct is to avoid wind, avoid slopes. But here, all evidence goes into higher terrain and scattered along an extended line, not a fall line. That led to the first contradiction. The evidence does not lie on a reasonable path for lost people. Next, Ranger Shaver pulled up the photo of the torn insole again. If the shoe was damaged from slipping, he said, we would very likely have found at least blood, torn fabric, or clearer slide marks. But the area around the insole was completely clean, no scrape marks, no plowed soil, no impacted boulders. Second contradiction. The insole piece lies in a location inconsistent with a fall. Next was the fabric cord strip. Hale picked it up again, examining the tear at the end. This is a tear from pulling force. Not breakage from abrasion. But pulling force from where? No one knew. Even stranger. The cord was caught in the pine bush from an above-downward direction, while that day's wind blew the opposite way. If not wind, then what brought the cord to that spot? Third contradiction. The fabric cord strip appears to have been displaced, not a natural drop. In the internal report, Megan had noted the question. Was the evidence placed there, blown by wind, or dropped by someone while moving? But there was no answer yet. Finally, the glove. If it was Lydia's glove, it could have fallen while she tried to grab a tree trunk or lost balance. But the glove's location was under a lightly disturbed pine needle layer, with no strong environmental impact. It felt as though it had fallen before soil and leaves partially covered it, but it did not match the slippery, wet terrain of the disappearance evening. Fourth contradiction. The glove fell into a position too clean given the previous night's weather conditions. When the Rangers reviewed all evidence discovery locations in chronological order, a suspicion began to form. Not a criminal suspicion, but a tactical question in the search. Could these pieces of evidence have been displaced after Evan and Lydia fell into danger? Ranger Barrett offered the first hypothesis. Animals, bears, elk, coyotes, could drag items a few meters away. But Hale rejected it immediately. If animals interfered, items would be bitten, torn, show tooth marks. There are no such signs. Megan offered the second idea. Strong wind? Hale shook his head. No wind direction matches. A long silence fell in the command tent. No one wanted to voice the third hypothesis, the one that, if opened too early, would shift SAR from search to investigation, something federal protocol did not allow without direct evidence. Finally, Shaver reiterated. Nothing here is enough to say there was human intervention, but nothing reasonable fits an accident either. This was the biggest contradiction. All evidence neither ruled out an accident, nor was sufficient to conclude accident as the cause. The SAR team could not raise an official criminal suspicion. They only recorded these inconsistencies in the report, flagged in yellow priority monitoring level, but not yet moved to investigative lead. Outside, wind began blowing harder, driving cold air down from the higher glacier. Pine canopies swayed in strong gusts, as if reminding that nature does not easily reveal answers. As the rangers left the meeting to continue expanding the search, everyone carried the same uncomfortable feeling, as though they were following traces not left randomly, but also unable to prove they were intentional. A gray area began to form, and in that gray area, the biggest question remained unanswered. Did Evan and Lydia go to those places on their own, or were they brought there? In the days that followed, from the 5th day through the 14th, the search operation for Evan and Lydia Turner shifted into the largest and most grueling phase of the entire case. After the initial contradictions were recorded but not sufficient to form any definitive hypothesis, the NPS decided to expand the scope to the entire northwest quadrant of Glacier Gorge, including the edge of Chaos Canyon, Timberline Falls, and the small permanent ice section above. The terrain here made every step forward feel like a battle, and every ranger understood they were searching in a land where nature did not favor humans. Right from the 5th day, an augmented helicopter team was deployed, including one with high-sensitivity infrared cameras. The entire mountainside was swept from multiple angles, not just during the day but also near dusk and dawn times, when temperature changes made it easier to distinguish between rock, trees, and any unusual heat signatures. But across 7 flights and nearly 40 hours of continuous scanning, no thermal signals suggested the presence of living people. All the cameras captured were cold rock patches, damp tree trunks, and a few small heat spots from wildlife. Meanwhile, the K9 teams continued to be deployed during the rare intervals when wind and humidity allowed. Even after switching to scent samples from other personal items belonging to the couple, the results were similar. Scents were layered by wind, scattered, or completely masked. A few times, the K9s showed interest at some point on a sloping rock field, but upon inspection, it was only where an animal had rested the previous night. On the 6th day, a specialized rock cliff search team was sent up into the higher sections of Chaos Canyon. They used safety ropes to access steep rock bands that ordinary hikers would not climb. But despite sweeping every ledge, every small crevice, they found no signs of bodies, clothing, or any items belonging to Evan and Lydia. Teams surveying the glacier far more dangerous were also deployed. The glacier in this area was small but sharp, with a rough surface and many deep crevasses. Some rangers rappelled into narrow ice cracks to check if anything had been caught during ice movement, but each inspection returned empty. On the 8th day, the SAR team lowered the temporary command post due to strong winds on the peaks, making equipment setup difficult. Cold rain returned, erasing any remaining traces from the previous day. The constant shifts between rain, wind, and fog made the entire area feel like it was self-erasing every answer. The initial evidence, the glove, fabric cord, insole piece, grew increasingly isolated in a land that offered no response. On the 9th day, Ranger Barrett wrote in the report, "No new traces. No sounds. No movement. Nothing." A simple note, heavy as stone. On the 10th day, the NPS expanded another 2 square miles northeast, in case the couple had slipped into a ravine and been carried farther by water or rock. But even in lower areas where muddy soil could preserve traces for days, there was not a single boot print, no slide marks, no scraps of fabric. The trail seemed to vanish completely. By the 12th day, the SAR team began to tire. Faces full of determination on the first day now looked weary and strained. Ranger Shaver, though he did not say it aloud, recognized what everyone saw. Rocky Mountain nature was giving no answers back. Each day felt twice as long, and each night brought only cold wind and heavy silence. On the 13th day, the lake and stream specialist team began checking water flows from the glacier down. This rarely yields results, but it had to be done to rule out all possibilities. After 6 hours of sweeping with specialized hooks and underwater cameras, they found nothing beyond rock, tree roots, and cold mud. By the 14th day, the final meeting took place. All teams were present. A large map was laid out in the command tent, marked with dozens of checked positions over the 2 weeks. The entire area, from the LKP to farther dangerous zones, was shaded in green, the color indicating fully surveyed. But alongside it, no points were marked in red, no significant discoveries in the 2 weeks. Ranger Shaver stood before everyone, his voice slow but firm. No one wants to reach this day. But per federal regulations, and based on all available data, we must suspend the official search. There were no objections. Only a heavy weight spread through the tent. In the final report, Shaver wrote, "No bodies found. No confirmed direction of travel. Case transitions to cold case review." And so, after 14 days of full effort, full contradictions, and no resolution, the disappearance of Evan and Lydia Turner officially entered the state. Every SAR team dreads recording. A traceless missing persons case, a new cold case in the heart of Rocky Mountain. When the official search was suspended, and the Evan Lydia Turner disappearance shifted to cold case status, the atmosphere in the field command post changed completely. Instead of the busy radio chatter and rangers calling across the forest, now there was only wind blowing through the tent and the scattered sounds of the team packing equipment. But in a temporary room built from two joined metal containers, a small group continued working. The Rocky Mountain National Park Cold Case Review Team. Unlike the SAR team, they did not trek through forests, climb cliffs, or follow trails. Their job was to dissect everything gathered over the 14 days of searching, every meter of ground, every left-behind piece of evidence, every drone image, every note, to see if anything had been overlooked. Leading the team was Ranger Analyst Helen Ward, a specialist in natural crime scene analysis and missing persons behavior. Helen had an unchanging principle. No evidence is in the wrong place. We just haven't understood why it is there. Soil analysis. Evidence not in original location. The first thing Helen requested was to bring all 4 collected pieces of evidence: the glove, insole fragment, fabric cord strip, and soil sample from the scratch mark into the soil analysis room. In forest missing persons cases, soil is far more important evidence than most people think. Soil retains the geological traces of the area where the item first appeared, thanks to microscopic differences in soil types, minerals, moisture, and grain structure. When soil samples were taken from the glove's exterior and compared to the soil under the pine where it was found, the first thing Helen noticed was the mismatch. Soil on the glove had smaller grain size, rich in fine granite powder. Soil under the pine where the glove was found had coarser grains, with more organic matter from pine needles. Initial conclusion, Helen said. The glove did not drop where it was found. It had contacted soil in a different terrain type, then was brought there somehow. Next was the fabric cord strip. Soil on the cord showed signs of cold, damp, high-altitude rock, with silica impurities typical of trail edges near the glacier. But the cord's discovery location was on a low pine bush, 200 feet lower than the glacier rim. This led Helen to a notable conclusion. The cord strip was once in a higher place, but appeared in a lower one, and wind could not have brought it down. The insole fragment was similar. Soil on its inner surface matched cold rock soil west of Chaos Canyon, not matching the soil where it was seen. All 3 pieces of evidence were dishonest about their location. They seemed to have moved. Discovery of a strange hair. While Helen focused on soil, forensic technicians per cold case protocol examined all evidence under UV light and electron microscopy. Within a few hours, they found something no one had noticed during the entire search campaign: a hair strand attached to the fabric cord strip. This hair was very fine, about 6 centimeters long, light brown, not broken by strong pulling force. After examination, it did not match Lydia Turner's DNA sample. It did not match Evan Turner's DNA sample. It did not match any ranger or technician exclusion list established from the start. The technician frowned. Cannot determine gender from shape, but it belongs to someone else. Someone else, a phrase that in cold cases always comes with a series of hard-to-answer questions. Data mapping, a path begins to emerge. Helen began pinning locations on the map, one by one. The glove location, the insole fragment location, the fabric cord location, the soil scratch location, the trail camera spot recording 3 silhouettes, and the area where Rachel heard the cry. When connected, they all formed a seamless, curved line, heading straight to a high rock ledge north of Chaos Canyon. Not a trail, not a natural path, but an area ordinary hikers would never enter. Helen stood silently before the map for a long time. Then she said, "This is not a fall path. This is not a lost path. Someone or something led them in this direction." The room fell silent. No one dared call this a criminal suspicion. No one was allowed to record it in the report. But someone had appeared for the first time as a possibility. Revisiting the trail camera, the third figure was not random. Helen requested the grainy trail camera video be played again. The footage of 3 silhouettes heading north, the third one trailing several meters behind. This time, viewed with the context of mismatched soil and displaced evidence, the clip became far more abnormal. The first 2 silhouettes moved with trekking poles like hikers. The third silhouette had no trekking poles, with footsteps not matching hiker rhythm. The distance between them was not close like a normal hiking group. Helen murmured, "If the third figure was not with them, then he was following them." A ranger asked, "Can we confirm it is human?" Helen replied, "We cannot confirm from this video. But it is not an animal, and the movement does not look like someone fleeing. It looks like observing. Initial suspicions but not enough grounds." Helen compiled the findings into the cold case report. Mismatched soil evidence was displaced. Fabric cord with hair from an unknown person. Soil scratch inconsistent with accident. Chain of evidence, leading in a direction illogical for lost people. Trail camera recording 3 unidentified silhouettes. Witness hearing a cry at a time inconsistent with typical hiker accidents. But despite everything being strange, no piece of evidence directly pointed to crime or violent acts. The soil and hair findings only reached the level of unusual, insufficient to open an official federal investigation file. Shaver reviewed the report and sighed. "We have leads, but no evidence." The Turner cold case, in the truest sense, remained a cold case. It could not yet be considered a criminal case, but it was no longer an ordinary missing persons case. And in the conclusion section of that day's review, Helen wrote a short sentence that later became the key to the entire case. "There are signs indicating the presence of a third individual, but the identity and role of this person completely undetermined." 1 year passed since the official search for Evan and Lydia Turner concluded, and the file was transferred to cold case status. Over those 12 months, the Turner file sank into almost absolute silence. No new discoveries. No additional witnesses. No reports of strange evidence appearing in the area. The couple's disappearance gradually became one of Rocky Mountain's quiet mysteries. Not a nationally sensational case, but haunting enough for the rangers who had participated in the search. Lead Ranger Shaver still kept the full map and original evidence items in a file box at the Estes Park office. Every month, he would open the box once, review the old notes, the pins reconnecting the evidence chain, and the puzzling movement direction. Each time he looked at that map, he felt the same thing. This is not over. And then, exactly 1 year after the disappearance at the start of September, the same season the couple vanished, the silence was broken. One Monday morning, Shaver received a call from a group of 3 hikers who had just returned from a 3-day trip in the North Chaos Canyon area. They reported seeing something unusual. A small wooden structure, like a cabin, deep in the forest, in a location that did not appear on any NPS terrain maps or structure inventories. According to their description, this hidden cabin was not near any main trail, was concealed by thick canopy to the point it was almost invisible from afar, showed signs of recent use, and most importantly, had human boot prints around it, not animal tracks. One of the 3 hikers, named Alex Burton, said a sentence that made Shaver stand up abruptly. It looked like someone had been living there. Not temporarily. Like, living there. Shaver asked immediately, "Did you take photos?" Alex replied that they only managed 1 single photo before rain started. The photo was emailed minutes later. In the image, the cabin appeared blurry but recognizable. A wooden structure. Old planks but reinforced with some new metal beams. The cabin door was closed. Around it were a few indistinct items behind partially obscuring rocks. This cabin absolutely did not exist in park records. And the matter grew even more suspicious when Alex added, "Both times we approached, we heard sounds, like someone stepping back inside." Shaver stared at the photo for a long time. An unregistered hidden structure, located exactly in the direction all the Turner case evidence had pointed. This could not be random coincidence. Helen Ward was called back immediately. She reopened last year's map and cross-referenced the cabin location described by the hikers. When pinning the cabin spot on the map, the straight line connecting the cabin to the evidence chain from the glove, insole fragment, cord strip, soil scratch, suddenly aligned perfectly. Helen stared at the map and said slowly, "The cabin lies exactly on the path formed by the evidence chain." Barrett, the ranger who found the insole fragment last year, muttered, "But that area, we considered it impossible terrain. No structures or shelters at all. How could a cabin exist without anyone seeing it?" Helen replied, "It may not have existed at the time of the search. Or, we did not go deep enough." A vague hypothesis, but it matched the reality that SAR had multiple times skipped overly narrow rock crevices or excessively dense forest sections for safe movement. The hidden cabin suggested a second possibility, one Helen did not yet want to voice. A third person might have been living there. In the second phone contact, Alex Burton added one more detail that Shaver's medical team initially thought might be from a dead animal. "When we got close to the cabin, we smelled something like rotting meat or a damp, moldy smell. But it was fleeting, then gone." Shaver asked right away, "Could it be a dead animal?" Alex hesitated. "I've seen plenty of animal carcasses. This smell wasn't quite the same." This detail led Helen to a bolder hypothesis. The cabin might have been used recently, or was still being used. An emergency meeting was immediately convened. Shaver, Helen, Barrett, the GIS team, and a retired veteran ranger were invited to consult because he had once heard rumors about stealth cabins existing deep in the RMNP forest decades earlier. Upon hearing the cabin description, he said right away, "If that cabin isn't in park records, and if it's been recently repaired, someone is intentionally living off the grid. And people who live off the grid always have reasons for not wanting to be found." That statement plunged the room into silence. Helen refolded the map, took a deep breath, and said, "The appearance of this hidden cabin gives all last year's evidence meaning again. Not blown by wind, not random drops, but a path." Barrett asked immediately, "Leading whom? From where? Why?" Helen did not answer, but in her eyes, everyone could clearly see that the Turner case was no longer an ordinary missing persons case. After the meeting, Shaver stood before the cabin photo for a long while. That shadowy cabin in the forest, not large, not prominent, but placed exactly in the area nature seemed to deliberately conceal. What chilled him most was not the cabin itself. It was the feeling that the cabin had been watching them for the past year, while they had no idea. Shaver only wrote one line in the duty log. "First lead after 12 months. Cabin, not in records. Requires immediate verification. Feeling, human involvement." He did not know that this discovery would lead straight to the biggest twist in the entire case. He only knew that for the past year, the forest had been silent. And now, Rocky Mountain itself was the first to break that silence. 3 days after the hikers reported the hidden cabin, while the NPS team was still discussing plans to approach the area, an unexpected call from the Walden, Colorado Police Department, a small town more than 40 miles of mountain road from Rocky Mountain, turned everything upside down. "We believe we have found one of the 2 people missing in RMNP last year," the duty officer said. "His name, according to ID, is Evan Turner." The report made Lead Ranger Shaver jump from his chair. From a cold case thought to have sunk into absolute silence, now one of the 2 had returned, and returned in a place far too distant from RMNP to be explained by any natural route. When Shaver and Helen drove to Walden, they were led into the town's small emergency room. Evan Turner lay on the hospital bed, face gaunt and hollow, beard unkempt, hair far longer than in the photos from his file a year earlier. His physical condition was highly unusual, hands calloused, as if from continuous heavy labor, chafing marks on wrists resembling restraint. A long scar less than 3 months old running along his left side, completely inconsistent with typical hiker fall injuries. His body showed no signs of prolonged malnutrition, completely opposite to someone surviving a year in the wilderness. Hydration and electrolyte levels in his blood were nearly normal. But what prompted the doctor to report immediately to NPS was Evan's mental state. He had no idea where he had been for the past 12 months. Shaver sat beside the bed and spoke gently. "Evan, do you know where you are?" Evan looked around, eyes filled with confusion and exhaustion. I don't remember. I don't know. I only remember hiking with Lydia. Then everything went blank." "Blank how?" Helen asked. Evan closed his eyes, voice trembling, like someone flipped a switch. To determine how Evan had survived the past year, doctors conducted deeper examinations. Fingernails neatly trimmed, no chips or dirt. Skin with no sunburn, unlike someone continuously exposed to high-altitude sun. No common skin parasites found in long-term forest wanderers. No severe weight loss, though thin. Muscles not atrophied, unlike someone with prolonged food deprivation. This ruled out the possibility that Evan had survived off the land or wandered the forest for a year. He had been somewhere sheltered, with minimal living conditions, possibly even cared for, though not fully. Helen stood beside the bed, scanning Evan's body, then quietly said to Shaver, "No one survives a winter in RMNP without severe cold damage signs. Here, there are none." Shaver replied briefly, "Then he wasn't in the forest." Walden police reported that Evan was discovered at sunrise, staggering along Highway 14, about 2 miles from town. A truck driver saw him barefoot, wearing a thin, torn shirt, repeatedly looking back toward the forest as if afraid something was following. Evan only repeated one sentence to police. "I have to go back. I have to find Lydia." But when asked where Lydia was, he went blank. Walden is more than 40 miles as the crow flies from RMNP, and the terrain between is rugged mountains, rock gorges, dense forest, and pathless areas. By no logic could Evan have walked out of RMNP to Walden in a year without being seen. After Evan was admitted to the ER, Walden police collected all items on his person. The list was very short: torn shirt, worn long pants, homemade belt twisted from fabric fibers, a smooth stone in his pocket, and one item that made Helen pause for several seconds when she saw it: a small hand-carved piece of wood. The wood piece was about 5 inches long, with knife marks on the surface, but what stood out was the fresh pine resin smell and clean cuts identical to the hand-whittled style seen in deep forest hidden cabins. Helen picked up the wood piece and turned to Shaver. "You remember the cabin the hikers saw?" Shaver nodded slightly. Both looked at the wood piece shape, material, pine resin smell, all matching like a fragment broken from cabin planking. Police said they found the wood piece in Evan's pants pocket wrapped in a small cloth scrap. Clearly, Evan carried it as something important, or at least connected to wherever he had existed during the missing time. When fully awake after IV fluids, Evan began speaking more but mostly fragmented, vague, as if his memory were fogged. "I remember darkness. I remember someone walking. I remember the smell of pine resin. Lydia was standing right there, then gone. I don't know why I'm here." When Helen asked, "Were you ever in a cabin?" Evan looked at her, eyes suddenly panicked. "What cabin? I don't remember any cabin. I don't want to remember." He visibly shook. The doctor intervened, requesting the interview be paused. While Evan slept again, the head doctor approached Shaver and Helen quietly. "There's one thing bothering me. The injuries on his body are not from falls or scratches from rock or branches. They resemble injuries from being restrained or dragged." "Restrained?" Shaver asked. The doctor pointed to the wrist chafing. "These are rope marks. Not climbing rope, fabric tie or soft cord." Helen glanced at the wood piece in the evidence bag, then back to the cabin map. 1 year of silence, 1 hidden cabin. 1 person returned with blank memory, 1 wood piece matching the cabin, and injuries inconsistent with surviving in the forest. Everything was slowly converging on the same point, like puzzle pieces refusing to stay still. Shaver wrote the final line in the report that very night. "Evan Turner has returned. Condition: inconsistent with natural disappearance. Item in pocket possibly linked to hidden cabin. Turner case. No longer a simple missing persons case, But he did not yet dare voice what both he and Helen felt. Evan had not just been missing for 12 months. He had brought something back, or from someone. The first interview with Evan Turner took place the next morning, right in the small hospital room at the Walden Town Medical Center. The doctor allowed Lead Ranger Shaver and Helen Ward to conduct a short interview but requested limited time due to Evan's fragile mental state. Evan sat propped against the bed corner, hands resting on the thin blanket. He did not look like someone who had just escaped death, nor like someone who had wandered for a year. He looked like a person waking from a long coma alert but displaced, disconnected from the reality around him. Helen began gently, "Evan, we just want to hear whatever you remember from that last day in Rocky Mountain. Anything, no matter how small. There are no right or wrong answers." Evan looked at her for a few seconds, his eyes trying to focus but not really connecting with anyone in the room. He nodded, sighed, and began to speak slowly, fragmented, as if thinking of each word as he said it. "I remember Lydia and I starting on the trail. It was cold. There was mist. We went deeper into the forest." He paused. "Then, I remember Lydia saying that she heard something behind us." Helen leaned forward slightly. "What kind of sound?" Evan frowned, as if trying to retrieve a distant feeling. "I don't know." But it made her worried. I thought it was an animal." "Did you turn around to check?" Shaver asked. Evan shook his head. "I didn't think it was a problem." But as soon as that answer ended, Helen immediately noticed the first contradiction. According to hiker Colin Avery's report, it was Lydia who kept looking back, not Evan. Yet Evan described it the opposite way, as if he was the one observing Lydia's worry, rather than Lydia actively reacting to something. Evan continued, "We kept going. Then the trail narrowed. Then there was a turn I don't remember clearly. I thought we were on the right path. But after that, everything faded." Helen asked, "Faded how?" Evan raised his hand to his temple, pressing lightly as if in pain. "Like the mist thickened. Like all sounds disappeared. I heard footsteps behind us." Both Shaver and Helen looked up. This was the first time in Evan's account that a third person appeared, even though Evan had not yet clarified whether it was a person or something else. "Are you sure it was footsteps?" Shaver asked, his voice very soft but sharp. Evan nodded, eyes opening a bit wider. "Yes. Footsteps. Not an animal. Heavy. Slow. Like someone trying to keep distance." Helen asked quickly, "How far?" Evan closed his eyes, trying to recall. "About a few meters. Close enough to hear. Far enough that I couldn't see clearly." A very slight shiver passed through his body. Helen glanced at Shaver. This was the second time in the entire file that a description matched the trail camera footage 2 hikers ahead, and a third silhouette trailing several meters behind. But Helen said nothing. This was only the first interview, and Evan's state was too unstable to determine the accuracy of his memory. Evan continued, but the story grew more vague. "I remember Lydia turning to look. Then she said something. Very quietly. I couldn't hear it. I only heard the wind. Then I remember her disappearing." Helen shifted slightly. "Disappearing? What do you mean? Where did Lydia go?" Evan opened his eyes, showing clear confusion mixed with fear. "I don't know. She was right in front of me. Then I turned because I heard the sound behind, and when I turned back forward, Lydia was no longer there." Shaver asked, "Did you call for her? Did you run to look?" Evan lowered his head, hands gripping the blanket, voice weakening. "I called. I ran. But I didn't hear her respond. Only the wind. And the footsteps. Farther away." Helen noted, "Footsteps farther away." This suggested movement, but nothing could be concluded yet. Then Evan said the sentence that made both rangers in the room freeze completely. "I remember someone touching my shoulder." Helen asked immediately. Evan shook his head repeatedly. "I don't know. I don't remember a face. No voice. Nothing. Just a hand. Cold. Strong. placed on my shoulder. Then what? Shaver asked. Evan replied, voice so low they had to lean in to hear. Everything went dark. Then I woke up. Here. The two rangers looked at each other. Not because Evan's story was full of gaps, they had expected that, but because the fragmented memories all revolved around the same axis. Footsteps following, someone keeping distance, Lydia's fear, Lydia's sudden disappearance, a hand placed on Evan's shoulder, and memory switched off like a light. Helen understood that Evan's vagueness could be a symptom of psychological shock or neurological damage. But there was one thing she could not ignore. What Evan remembered matched chillingly with the anomalies in the cold case review and with the three silhouettes in the trail camera footage. The interview lasted only 18 minutes because the doctor requested it stop. Before leaving the room, Helen asked one final question. Evan, do you know what happened to Lydia? Evan looked at her, eyes red, tired, and afraid. I don't know. But I feel someone took us off the trail. He swallowed hard, as if forcing out something he did not want to believe. Not naturally. Not an accident. Helen stood motionless for a few seconds. That was the first statement from Evan's own mouth, affirming a third factor, though unclear, though not enough for an investigative report. But it shook the entire Turner file. Back in the hallway, Shaver wrote only a short line in his notebook. Evan's statement. Contradictory, fragmented, but includes third-party element. Cannot be ignored. The first interview with Evan Turner ended with more questions than answers, and as soon as they left the hospital room, Helen Ward requested that all items recovered from Evan be transferred to the NPS Forensic Analysis Lab in Denver. In any missing persons case, especially when one of the two victims suddenly returns after exactly 1 year, forensics is the key to determining where Evan had been, what he had done, and most importantly, who he had been with during that blank period. Lead Ranger Shaver initially hesitated. Evan was a missing person victim, not a suspect. But Helen countered clearly, not a criminal investigation. Determining survival environment. We need to know where Evan was for the past 12 months. Shaver understood. Evan was not being treated as a suspect, but every piece of evidence had to be analyzed as part of the verification process, since Evan himself did not know where he had been. The first item analyzed was Evan's shoes. Though worn, torn at the edges, and dirty as if walked over many different surfaces, the trapped soil in the tread grooves is the hardest to erase. When the soil samples were extracted and examined under an electron microscope, a conclusion made Helen stand silent in the analysis room. The soil under Evan's shoes matched perfectly with the soil type taken from the area where the hikers reported the hidden cabin, a distinctive soil with ultra-fine silica grains, white granite dust, fractured quartz crystal fragments, and a grain structure only found in high-altitude areas with seasonal ice melt. The Glacier Gorge Trail area does not have this type of soil. Chaos Canyon does not either. But the steep northern ridge, where the cabin was reported, does, Helen murmured. Evan was at the cabin area. Not by chance. Not soil blown into his shoes by wind. He stood there. Shaver, despite his experience, had to lean on the steel table. This means he was right where the cabin appeared. Helen nodded. This was the first physical evidence showing Evan was not misremembering. He had actually been present in the cabin area, even though he denied ever seeing a cabin or remembering anything about it. The second discovery came from the Denver forensic pathologist. On Evan's wrists, where Shaver and Helen had seen the dark marks, they were confirmed as rope burns, friction marks from rope or fabric binding. And more importantly, the rope burns were not recent, estimated to have occurred within the last 4 to 6 months, partially healed, but still showing characteristic scar tissue. The forensic doctor explained, these are not marks hikers make on themselves for warmth or first aid. These are repeated binding or medium-duration strong binding marks. Not an accident. Not environmental. A ranger asked, could he have tied himself? The doctor replied, unlikely. The binding marks are on the inner wrists, a position typical of being bound, not self-binding. And most notably, the rope burns on both wrists were asymmetrical, meaning the left wrist was bound more tightly than the right, indicating someone tied his hands to a fixed object, rather than tying both hands together. Helen noted in the report, Evan shows signs of restraint, not from accident. This was the first discovery that changed the trajectory of the Turner case. Following standard forensic protocol when a victim reappears after long-term disappearance, doctors collected DNA samples from under Evan's fingernails. This was not for criminal purposes, but to check if Evan had struggled against the environment, animals, or injuries. The results made the entire forensic room freeze for several seconds. There were 3 DNA types mixed under Evan's fingernails. Anna. Evan's own DNA normal. 2. Unknown source DNA. No match in CODIS, possibly from the forest environment. 3. Clean foreign human DNA, consistent across 3 nails, not matching Lydia Turner. Helen immediately requested cross-checking against all NPS personnel files, SAR team, the hikers who reported the cabin, and Walden police all excluded. That foreign DNA did not belong to anyone who had touched Evan since he was found. Meaning, the DNA belonged to a person Evan had contact with while missing. Shaver looked at the results sheet. Voice lowering. Human DNA, under the missing victim's fingernails, not his wife's, cannot be taken lightly. Still, Helen had to follow protocol. Not enough to open a criminal investigation, but enough to confirm the presence of a third person. Other minor injuries were also analyzed. Horizontal bruising on the right side, unlike fall impacts. Skin tear, hand stitched with coarse thread. Arm bruising shaped like a small hard object, such as a bed headboard or cabinet edge. The forensic doctor shook his head. No signs of frostbite. No long-term malnutrition damage. No exposure injuries from sleeping outdoors. He was in a sheltered place. Helen whispered, cabin. The final item Helen requested analysis for was the small wood piece found in Evan's pocket when Walden police admitted him. Wood fiber testing showed wood from lodgepole pine, cut by a handheld knife, not a saw. Fresh resin on the cut edge, indicating it was cut no more than 3 months ago. A forensic technician said immediately, "This is not random fallen wood from the forest. Not decayed wood. This is a fragment broken from a structure, possibly a wall, door, or furniture." Helen compared it to the photos of the cabin sent by the hikers. The cabin planks in the photos used the exact same lodgepole wood, with very similar rough knife cuts. When Helen placed the wood piece next to the cabin photo, everyone in the room fell silent. It matched, not just the wood type, not just the cut pattern, not just the fresh resin. The wood piece looked like a part torn from that very cabin. Shaver said quietly, voice tense. Evan was in the cabin. Whether he remembers it or not, Helen replied, not just there. He carried the wood piece with him, meaning the cabin played a role in his missing time. After hundreds of pages of forensic results, Helen wrote the temporary conclusion in the report. Evan's shoe soil matches cabin location. Old rope burns restraint. Foreign DNA under nails contact with another person. Injuries, inconsistent with wilderness survival. Wood piece cabin. A logical chain emerged, not a criminal conclusion, but forensic logic. Evan did not survive in the wilderness. He was in a sheltered place. That place was near the cabin. He had contact with at least one person. Everything pointed in the same direction. The same location. The same third silhouette not yet in the file. And for the first time since the Turner case began, Shaver had to voice a sentence he had not dared say for the past year. Evan did not disappear alone. The investigation, though not yet official, had entered an entirely new chapter. Just as news of Evan's return reignited the Turner case, only 3 days later, Rocky Mountain National Park was shaken again by a completely unexpected announcement. A female body was discovered at the northern edge of the Chaos Canyon Glacier, exactly the area marked on the cold case review map. The report came from a University of Colorado geology team surveying the glacier in late summer. The glacier in the area was melting faster than any previous year due to sudden temperature rise, exposing old ice layers unseen for decades. And in the newly separated ice section, deep in a narrow crevice between 2 frigid granite blocks, they spotted a dark-colored fabric scrap, then a pale arm. Ranger Shaver received the call at 6:42 in the morning. Upon hearing female body, he nearly stopped breathing for several seconds. Upon hearing the clothing description, he knew, even without DNA testing, that it was Lydia Turner. The NPS and SAR teams immediately flew by helicopter to the glacier site, an area considered nearly inaccessible in cold seasons. But in late summer, the ice at the glacier edge had softened, creating large crevices that exposed chaotic terrain of rock, glacial mud, and fast-flowing meltwater channels. Lydia's body lay deeper than expected, about 12 feet inside a crevice just wide enough for a person to crouch and enter. Part of the ice had melted, exposing the upper torso, but the lower body remained trapped in old ice. As sunlight reflected off the surrounding ice, the body looked as though sleeping in a cold glass coffin. Helen stood a few steps away, gloved hands, whispering, "She did not fall in here on her own." What made her say that? The body's position was too deep and too horizontal compared to typical glacier fall accident models. A person slipping from the glacier edge would fall vertically or be swept down a channel, but Lydia lay horizontally, as if pushed or placed into the rock crevice. When the forensic team approached the body, they recorded the outer jacket torn horizontally on the left shoulder, not vertically as in a trip and fall tear, the inner shirt pulled askew, buttons popped, the backpack zipper pull broken not from natural strong pulling force, light scratching on the collar, resembling fabric friction from being grabbed and dragged. These tears were inconsistent with a mountaineering accident. Accidents typically create tears along the direction of motion, cuts from rock, or abrasion from ice. But the tears here were small, concentrated, horizontal, and not following the logic of body movement in a fall. Ranger Barrett quietly said to Helen, if she had fallen into the crevice, the injuries would be different. This looks like human action. Helen did not respond, but her eyes confirmed it. When the ice around the body was cut and the body gently lifted, one detail made the entire forensic team freeze. Lydia's posture was completely unlike a free-fall posture. The body lay tilted to the right, left arm naturally bent, right leg extended, left leg slightly flexed, head slightly tilted toward the ice bottom. Dr. Hale, who had returned to assist with glacier analysis, explained, if Lydia had fallen from above, the body would be in a curled or prone position. This is a placed position, a younger ranger asked quietly. Placed? By hand? Or dragged? Hale replied, cannot tell. But this is not an accident posture. No one said more. When Lydia's body was brought to the temporary analysis station set up in Estes Park, the forensic team conducted the initial autopsy. The first results made the atmosphere in the room thicken. 3 bruises on the upper right arm, elliptical, matching the pattern of fingertip bruises, light binding marks on the left wrist, not from climbing rope, stretched collar, small split on the lower lip indicating Lydia had been pressed or held just before death. But what made everyone stand stunned? The cause of death was not cold, not fall, not glacial drowning. From initial findings, Lydia died before the body was placed in the ice. No major fractures, no fatal head trauma. Based on tissue decomposition levels, death occurred before the body was placed in the glacier. Helen wrote directly in the report, Lydia's body was moved after death. This is not an accident. When checking Lydia's jacket pockets, forensics found a small dark gray fabric scrap, torn at the edge, not belonging to Lydia's clothing, not from the backpack, not from hiking gear. This fabric type resembled cabin interior, fabric chair, curtain, blanket. Helen held the fabric scrap close to her eyes and said quietly, same type as the hidden cabin. Both Barrett and Shaver fell silent. When comparing the fabric Lydia carried with the wood piece, Evan carried 2 items separated by a year, 2 people in different places. Helen realized both belonged to the same place. The Northern Chaos Canyon Glacier has no natural access, no trail, unsuitable for hikers. To place a body there required circling around rock walls, using complex terrain, or knowing the exact natural crevice, something only someone living in the area for a long time would know. Helen laid the glacier map on the table, a line connecting hidden cabin evidence chain area glacier crevice. All formed a complete loop. Shaver looked at the map. Voice very low. Someone familiar with the terrain. Cannot be a stranger. Heelan replied. Or someone living at the cabin. The temporary report recorded. Lydia's body discovered due to glacier melt. Lydia died before being placed in ice. Body posture inconsistent with accident. Fingertip pattern bruises, signs of restraint. Wrist binding marks. No major fractures. Clothing tears from pulling. Not rock tripping. Cabin fabric scrap in jacket pocket. Body location accessible only to someone highly familiar with terrain. Everything combined into the single conclusion Helen wrote at the bottom of the page. Death. Suspicious. Body placed intentionally. Lydia did not die where she was found. Shaver stood before the examination table. Eyes sunken. He had seen many wilderness accident victims, but never one like this. And Helen, who had followed the Turner case from the beginning, stood silent for a long time. Then she said, almost unwilling to hear herself say it, Evan returned. Lydia was found. Both carried traces of the same place. The same person. Shaver asked, who is that person? Helen replied, voice low like a breath. I don't know, but someone exists in that forest, and we did not see him for an entire year. Lydia's forensic report ended, but the Turner case did not. When the glacier melted, it did not just return Lydia's body. It returned a dark mystery that Rocky Mountain had hidden under ice for the past 12 months. The discovery of Lydia Turner's body on the glacier pushed the entire case into a completely new phase, and the unavoidable next step in any national park missing persons death file is crime scene reconstruction. Using 3D modeling. Rocky Mountain has a dedicated unit using LiDAR technology, drone mapping, and 3D terrain software to recreate the environment based on evidence, traces, and weather data. This is the only way to check whether what people remember or think they saw matches what actually happened. Helen Ward requested the technical team begin reconstructing step by step. 1. Movement direction from the LKP. 2. Evidence chain. 3. Hidden cabin location. 4. Area where the cry was heard 1 year ago. 5. Route leading to the glacier. 6. And finally, the location where Lydia's body was discovered. When drones scanned the entire area from the cabin to the glacier, terrain data was loaded into the 3D software. On the large screen at the Estes Park Command Center, the terrain model rendered like a living version of Rocky Mountain. Steep slopes, rock fields, glacier crevices, dense pine forest, all displayed in colored layers, showing slope gradients and feasibility of each movement route. First data, route cannot be accident. When the technical team input each evidence location, glove, insole, cord strip, soil scratch, the software automatically analyzed whether a person moving at night, lost, or panicked could create this position chain. The computer took less than 10 seconds to conclude. The route is inconsistent with natural movement of a lost person. The system simulated reasonable footsteps for hikers in 12 scenarios: disorientation, fleeing, panic, energy depletion. But every simulation produced a downward path, not upward. The evidence chain scattered along a climb toward the cabin, not a fall from the cabin. Helen noted in her log, not a lost path, not an accident. Lydia attack simulation. When analyzing Lydia's posture in the glacier, the 3D team reconstructed 12 different fall scenarios from various heights and terrains. Results: no simulation produced the posture in which Lydia was found. The body posture matched someone placed lying down while unconscious or already deceased. A technician said, no fall force from any angle creates that posture. She was brought in there. Helen nodded silently. Reconstructing the disappearance. Night Lydia's path separates from Evan's. Based on Evan's fragmented statement, trail camera data, and evidence locations, the technical team backtracked the point where Lydia vanished. The trail camera recorded Evan and Lydia ahead, a third silhouette trailing several meters behind. The motion simulation software recreated the third silhouette maintaining steady distance, not changing speed with terrain, not accelerating on uphill sections. Helen watched the simulation and said, that walking style is not a hiker's. It is someone following. But most importantly, one branch of the simulation showed Lydia separating from Evan in a situation where she was pulled left into dense forest, where the glove soil matched cabin soil. By inputting soil data and movement angles into the simulation, the software reconstructed Lydia being turned, losing balance, and pulled off the main path. Shaver gripped the table, speaking very slowly. Lydia did not disappear by wandering off. Someone touched her. Reconstruction from cabin to glacier. The most critical simulation was recreating the route from the hidden cabin to the glacier crevice where Lydia's body was found. When the cabin was pinned on the 3D map, the software calculated possible nighttime movement routes with low light based on terrain, slope, and obstacles. Only one single route existed, circling the northern rock field from the cabin, slipping through a very narrow forest gap, descending a small slope, then moving horizontally along the glacier edge, finally entering the rock crevice where Lydia's body was placed. No hiker had ever used this route, because it was almost invisible to the naked eye. To travel this route required familiarity with the terrain, knowing the exact glacier crevice location, knowing the detour to avoid falling onto ice, and time to lead a body no longer capable of resistance. Helen said quietly, "The guide was not the victim. It was someone who knew the way." Reconstructing time of death and the key discovery, combining glacier temperature data over the past 12 months, average melt rates, and Lydia's tissue preservation levels, forensics concluded. Lydia died 6 to 18 hours before the body was placed in the glacier. She was held in a place not too cold, as the body showed no severe hypothermia damage. After death, the body was then moved into the glacier. When this data was input into the 3D simulation, the system concluded, the death location must be a sheltered place. No place in Chaos Canyon has shelter, except the hidden cabin. Helen gripped her notebook tightly. Lydia did not die outdoors, not from accident. She died in an enclosed place, and afterward the body was taken to the glacier. The chilling match. Cabin evidence, glacier Evan. When connecting all 3D data, Evan's shoe soil matches cabin. Wood piece in Evan's pocket matches cabin. Fabric scrap in Lydia's pocket matches cabin. Body location matches route from cabin. Evidence scattered from LKP to cabin. Trail camera showing third silhouette following. All 3D paths converged on one single point. The cabin. A cabin not in NPS records. No one except the hiker group had ever seen that cabin. But the cabin lay exactly where every evidence movement path pointed. When the final simulation ran from LKP to cabin, from cabin to glacier, the entire command room fell silent. Helen read her notes, voice no longer maintaining its usual calm. Lydia Turner was attacked at a different location. Did not die from accident. Body moved intentionally. Most likely, location, hidden cabin. Shaver stood, looking at the slowly rotating 3D model on the screen, an image of the small, dark cabin in the forest, like a black dot amid green. He said, "We have to approach the cabin." Helen replied, "And this time, we don't know what's waiting." The 3D reconstruction answered the most important question since Lydia's disappearance. She never went to the glacier on her own. Someone took her there. The second interview with Evan Turner took place when Lydia's forensic results were just released internally, and for Shaver, it was no longer an information-gathering conversation. This was the only chance to determine whether Evan knew what happened to Lydia, and most importantly, who the third person was that the 3D reconstruction had convincingly pointed to. Evan was transferred to a temporary interview room at the NPS Estes Park station to avoid hospital pressure. He sat in the small room, soft lighting, window half closed. But despite the gentler environment, Evan looked even more tense, hands clasped together, eyes down at the floor, not attempting eye contact like in the first interview. Shaver began with a calm but sharply cold voice of someone carrying too many unanswered questions. "Evan, we found Lydia." Evan looked up immediately. His eyes widened, but the expression did not settle into one clear emotion, not complete shock, but also not relief or pain. As if he had known it all along. Where?" Evan asked, voice trembling but not fully panicked. Helen sat beside Shaver, choosing a slow response. On the glacier, north of Chaos Canyon, Evan closed his eyes for several seconds. His shoulders dropped, like a person crushed by a burden he had carried for a year, a burden he thought he would never have to face again. When he opened his eyes, Evan did not ask, "How did she die?" He asked, "What did you find on her?" The question made Helen and Shaver glance at each other. An innocent person usually asks about the death first, not evidence. But Evan was concerned with what was found. Evan continued, voice low but clear. "Was there anything that didn't belong to her?" Helen answered directly, "Yes, a fabric scrap. Cabin-type fabric." The moment he heard the word cabin, Evan's entire body tensed like a tightly pulled string. His breathing became erratic immediately. Shaver said, voice suddenly stern, "Evan, what is that cabin? Where were you for the past 12 months? Were you there?" Evan shook his head, but not forcefully. A shake like a reflex, not an answer. "No. I don't remember a cabin." He swallowed, then repeated more slowly, "I don't want to remember a cabin." Helen leaned forward. "Evan, we need to know where that cabin is and who uses it. We need to know if Lydia went there." Evan was silent for a long time. His hands gripped so tightly the knuckles turned white. Then he said a sentence that chilled the room instantly. "I know who did it." Both Shaver and Helen froze. They had waited months, years to hear this. Shaver asked immediately. Evan looked straight at him. His eyes were no longer lost like the first time, but sharper, deeper, filled with something resembling resignation. But something else was even clearer in that gaze. Fear. "I can't say that person's name." "Evan." "Why?" Helen asked. "Because if I do," his chest heaved as if wrestling with primal fear, "that person will know I told." Shaver tried to stay calm. "Did that person hurt you?" Evan did not answer directly. He just rolled up his sleeve, revealing the old rope burn scar, still clearly etched on his skin. Then he asked back, voice breaking, "Do you believe me? Did I tell the truth? Or do you think I'm delusional?" Helen answered before Shaver could open his mouth. "Evan, forensics tells us one thing. You were not in the wilderness for the past 12 months. You were in a place with someone. You were in the cabin, or near the cabin. You did not tie yourself up, and you had contact with someone." Evan lowered his head. Helen continued, voice soft but sharp, "Evan, Lydia did not die from an accident." This time, he did not react like someone hearing bad news. He just said a sentence the entire interview team would never forget. "I know." Helen almost choked. She had to ask, "What did you see that night? Did you witness?" Evan interrupted, "I didn't witness everything. I just know that person pulled Lydia away first. I heard her call my name. Then something hit my head, and everything shut off." Helen recorded every word. Evan continued, voice like someone recalling a buried nightmare. "I woke up in a wooden room. No windows. Footsteps outside. I called for Lydia, but no one answered." Shaver gripped his pen. "Cabin." Evan neither denied nor confirmed. He said a half sentence. "I don't want to go back there." Helen asked the most important question. "Evan, who is that person?" Evan closed his eyes. A tear rolled down. He whispered, "I can't say the name. I'm not allowed to say the name." Shaver leaned forward. "Not allowed? Who forbade you?" "Evan, you are the victim in this case. You don't owe anyone silence." Evan looked straight at Helen, voice low like sound slipping through clenched teeth. "You don't understand. If I say the name, things will get worse." Helen tried to control her voice but could not hide her frustration. "Worse than what? You lost your wife. You were held for a year. How much worse can it get?" Evan shook his head, trembling violently. "You don't know that person. That person always knows everything. I can't say the name." Shaver understood the meaning of that sentence. Evan knows the perpetrator. He knows exactly who did it. But he is also so afraid of that person that he dares not utter the name, even while sitting in an interview room, surrounded by NPS and police. Helen did not press further. She only asked the final question. "Evan, Were you involved in Lydia's death? Evan broke down crying. Not loudly, not struggling, just tears falling like someone enduring an untouchable psychological wound. His voice choked. I tried to save her. I tried, but I couldn't fight that person. Helen concluded in the report. Evan Turner knows the perpetrator, but refuses to name them. Statement full of contradictions but consistent with forensics and 3D reconstruction. The Turner case, after a year sunk in darkness, was beginning to open, but not in a simple direction. In a direction that chilled everyone to the bone. Someone out there living in the forest no one knows about, and Evan fears that person more than anything else. The preliminary hearing was opened not to determine who the perpetrator was, since at that point, no one had been charged, but to answer one major question that the public, media, and even the Colorado State Prosecutor's Office could not avoid. Is Evan Turner a victim or involved in his wife's death? Evan's sudden reappearance after a year missing, with fragmented memory, carrying the cabin wood piece, along with forensic findings showing Lydia was attacked and moved post-mortem, all turned the initial hearing into one of the most attention-grabbing cases in Larimer County in years. The preliminary court aimed to determine whether there was enough basis to open a criminal file against Evan, or whether he was a victim needing protection. The courtroom was packed. Outside, media crowded. National outlets appeared because the story of the man who returned after a year missing had spread across the country. Prosecution. Evan disappeared intentionally. County Prosecutor Patricia Holbrook opened with a shocking argument. We have reason to believe Evan Turner intentionally disappeared for the first 6 months of the missing period. The room buzzed. Shaver frowned. Helen looked toward the prosecution bench, unable to believe they chose this attack angle. Prosecution presented the first evidence. Evan's initial statements contradicted between day 1 and day 2. A witness in Walden claimed to have seen Evan 2 months before he was officially discovered, but did not report it, thinking he was a vagrant. Prosecution projected a blurry gas station camera image from old Walden footage. A thin male figure, long hair, limping gait, face unclear, but prosecution claimed the gait was very similar to Evan. This proves he was not continuously restrained but free at times. Holbrook continued, there is no evidence Evan was bound for 12 months. Rope burns could be from short-term binding, not proving long-term victimhood. He may have fabricated the rest. Murmurs in the gallery increased. Holbrook leaned toward the preliminary jury. We must ask, why did Evan return exactly when the glacier melted and Lydia's body appeared? Why did he carry the cabin wood piece in his pocket? Why does he know who did it but refuse to name them? The prosecutor ended her opening with a heavy sentence. Evan Turner is not a passive witness. He is the central figure, and possibly the only one who knows the truth. Defense. Evan is a victim, and we have evidence. Evan's defense attorney, Karen Duvall, stood up. Not loudly, not counterattacking immediately. She opened with a sentence touching the truth the courtroom had just tried to avoid. Lydia Turner was attacked. She did not die at the glacier. And forensics proves it. That moment, the courtroom fell dead silent. Duvall continued. Prosecution wants to blur the violent nature of Lydia's death to fit Evan into a suspicious role? No. We will look at real evidence. Defense presented magnified forensic photos of rope burns, deep binding, skin tissue compressed in multiple layers, not short-term damage form. The forensic pathologist invited by defense as witness confirmed. This is repeated or prolonged binding rope burn. Cannot be self-inflicted. Cannot occur in a few hours. It matches detention for many days, even weeks. Prosecution objected, but the court allowed. Defense continued. Evan's shoe soil matches cabin, but the soil was in the deepest tread layer, meaning that soil was from the early missing period, not 6 months later. Duvall turned to prosecution. So how did Evan freely wander yet have no soil from Walden, dry and full of gravel dust? Why is the only soil in his shoes from the cabin? No one answered. Mild explosion in courtroom. Foreign DNA under Evan's nails. Defense presented forensic results. Foreign DNA under Evan's nails, not Lydia's, not Ranger's, not anyone in the investigation circle. That is third-party DNA. The entire courtroom erupted in shock. Defense closed. If Evan were the perpetrator or free for 12 months, why is there unidentified DNA under his fingernails? Where did that DNA come from, if not from the person holding him? Holbrook objected, but the judge allowed the evidence to remain in the record. Duvall ended with a steel sentence. Prosecution says Evan disappeared for 6 months. I say he was held for a year, and forensics stands with us. Surprise witness. I once saw him living in that cabin. Just when it seemed the hearing would adjourn, defense called a witness that even Helen and Shaver did not know would appear. An elderly man, about 68 years old, thin build, wearing an old sweater, stepped to the stand. He introduced himself. My name is Frederick Miles. I've lived in Estes Park for over 40 years. Holbrook frowned. He was not on the witness list. Miles looked straight at the judge and said, voice hoarse but clear, I reported to a ranger in 2019 that there was a strange man living in an abandoned cabin north of Chaos Canyon. The entire courtroom nearly jumped. Miles recounted. He saw lights in the forest at night. He once saw the silhouette of a tall, thin man near the cabin. The cabin at that time was fairly recently repaired, but he was asked by the ranger to file a report with NPS for handling and never heard anything again. Helen was stunned. There was no record of a 2019 report. None at all. Shaver breathed heavily. If that report was overlooked or lost, the cabin had existed before the Turner case, not newly appeared. Miles ended his testimony with a sentence that plunged the courtroom into absolute silence. I remember his face clearly. And Evan Turner is not the man I saw. Holbrook was stunned. Defense looked toward Evan, but Evan lowered his head, hands trembling. Helen quickly wrote in her notebook, witness confirms cabin occupied. Not by Evan. Preliminary court conclusion. After more than 3 hours of argument, the judge ruled, insufficient basis to charge Evan Turner. Clear basis showing Evan was a victim of detention. Hidden cabin becomes central factor. And especially, expanded investigation must be conducted immediately, focusing on the third person. The judge delivered the closing sentence. Either Evan is protecting someone, or there is someone far more dangerous out there. Evan kept his head down, hands clenched tightly, eyes filled with fear. The hearing ended, but the Turner case entered its most tense phase, when law, forensics, and witnesses all pointed to the same unnamed entity, the one who once lived in the cabin. The formal trial, not a preliminary hearing anymore, but a public trial to determine Evan Turner's role in his wife's death, opened in a heavy atmosphere, as if all of Larimer County was holding its breath. After what had unfolded in the preliminary hearing, national media descended on Estes Park, not because they believed Evan was the perpetrator, but because the story behind it was too vast, too tangled, and had too many dark gaps to ignore. Prosecution knew they faced a cautious jury, but they also knew, if they did not land a strong first punch, the case could slip completely from their grasp. They chose to open with what everyone anticipated, the ATM video evidence suggesting Evan may have been free at some point during the 12 months missing. ATM video prosecution's risky card. The courtroom darkened. The projector lit up. ATM video from a small town about 30 miles from Walden was displayed on the screen. Grainy image, greenish tint typical of old security cameras. A thin man, long hair, wearing a dark jacket, approached the ATM at 2:11 in the morning. Holbrook stood, pointing at the screen. This is evidence that Evan Turner was not continuously detained. He appeared more than 20 miles from the cabin and did not report to anyone, seek help, or contact family. Murmurs spread through the room. Evan's face tensed. Holbrook continued, we are not saying Evan withdrew money because the transaction was canceled. But he touched the keypad. He stood there for 48 seconds. And there is no sign he was being followed or coerced. Defense objected immediately. This video does not identify anyone. Resolution too low, face not visible. Holbrook smiled faintly. We will let the jury decide. But she had one more thing she believed would push Evan into weakness. Secret journey analysis. Journey analysis? Evan moved at night. Prosecution called a terrain and biological positioning analyst. He presented on a 3D screen. Movement direction of the person in the ATM video. Nearby trail routes. Walden location. and hidden cabin. Based on timing between the video recording and when Evan was found receiving medical care at Walden Hospital, he concluded, the 20-mile distance is fully achievable by the person in the video if he moved continuously through the night. Prosecution added, this proves Evan had the ability to leave the cabin on his own if he was truly held. In the gallery, some began whispering. Helen, seated behind, sighed. She knew the video was not enough to convict, but enough to plant doubt, and doubt spreads fastest in a courtroom. Counterstrike. Defense flips the ATM video. It was defense's turn to stand. Attorney Duvall walked to the center of the courtroom, unhurried. She pointed clearly at the video. There is no way to identify this as Evan Turner. Long hair? Evan was held long enough for his hair to grow. Thin build? Evan lost weight normal. Dark jacket? Thousands wear similar jackets. Holbrook prepared to object, but the judge signaled defense to continue. Duvall moved to the next slide. Scanned photos of soil under Evan's shoes. Evan's shoe soil matches cabin, but crucially, it was in the deepest tread layer, meaning the soil adhered from the early missing period. If Evan freely wandered to the ATM, Walden soil, dry brownish, would adhere to the outer layer. But forensics found none. She turned to the jury. Evan did not walk 20 miles through dusty terrain. He was not at the ATM. This video is insufficient to build any hypothesis. Wavering showed clearly on jurors' faces. Cabin witness returns and causes shock. Frederick Miles' testimony from the preliminary hearing had caused waves, but at the formal trial, he returned this time with concrete evidence. Miles was called to the stand. He placed an old notebook on the stand before the court. Edges worn, pages yellowed. Prosecution tensed. They did not know what he brought. Miles spoke slowly. This is my journal from 2019 and 2020. I recorded seeing lights at the hidden cabin. Observed from afar, suspecting illegal residents. He opened a page. October 14th, 2019. Saw light from cabin again. Someone living there. Not hikers. Tall male silhouette. Thin shoulders. Not Evan Turner. Prosecution immediately objected. Nothing proves the cabin he describes is the cabin related to the Turner case. Duvall only needed one sentence. Your Honor, there is only one hidden cabin. There is no second cabin in NPS records. The judge accepted it. Miles continued. April 30th, 2020. That man walked from the cabin to the forest edge at 3 a.m. No light. Not Evan. Holbrook lost composure. How can you be certain it wasn't Evan? Miles looked straight at her. Because Evan Turner has fair skin. The man I saw had darker skin, deeply tanned, from years living in the forest. And a completely different gait. The entire courtroom fell silent. Miles concluded. I reported to a ranger in 2019. No one responded. Then the cabin disappeared before the Turner case occurred. But that man, I never saw him again after 2020. Helen felt a chill down her spine. If the cabin existed before the Turner case, and someone lived there for years, then the ATM video no longer mattered. That person could have vanished before Evan returned. Gripping her hands tightly, Helen wrote in her notebook, the real perpetrator may not be in this courtroom. The cabin had a previous occupant. The previous occupant may have left. The true perpetrator may still be free. The trial reached recess, but no one stood up. Not the judge, not prosecution, not defense. Everyone understood. The trial was slipping from its original framework, because peeling back each layer of evidence, forensic rope burns, Evan detained, cabin soil, Evan, at cabin from the start, foreign DNA, third person, Lydia's evidence cabin, 3D reconstruction perpetrator familiar with terrain. Miles' testimony cabin existed before Turner case. Cabin man, not Evan, someone else. ATM video unidentified does not prove Evan free. Everything combined into an unexpected twist. The true perpetrator may never have been caught, and may have lived in the cabin for many years before the Turner case. End of trial. An unspoken feeling. Holbrook still tried to maintain control, but her initial confidence had cracked. Defense began to believe they could prove Evan an absolute victim. The jury leaned toward third person. And Evan. He sat silently, staring at his hands. Eyes empty like someone who knew more than everyone, but dared not speak. Helen looked at Evan for a long time. She did not see a perpetrator. She saw someone hiding something, but not out of guilt. Out of fear. A fear not for the law, but for the person who once lived in the cabin, the one they had not yet identified. And in that very moment, Helen understood. This trial was not to conclude Evan's guilt. It was to peel back the truth. The Turner case still had one figure, standing outside the light. As the trial dragged into the second week, the jury had heard every argument from both sides. No one in the courtroom, including the judge, believed Evan Turner directly caused his wife's death. But the harsh reality of the law was, Evan bore responsibility in part of the chain of events, whether coerced or not. On the final night, after 4 hours of tense deliberation, the jury delivered the verdict. Evan Turner not guilty of murder. Not guilty of second-degree murder, but guilty of a lesser charge. Manslaughter involuntarily causing death by failing to prevent a dangerous situation. The courtroom erupted in mixed emotions. Part of the public outraged, believing Evan completely innocent. Another part feeling the court fair with a light sentence, reflecting the case's immense ambiguity. Evan did not cry. He only closed his eyes, as if this sentence was far lighter than what he had carried in his mind for the 12 months inside the cabin. The judge pronounced 6 years suspended sentence, 18 months probation, mandatory psychological therapy, and full cooperation with the ongoing investigation into the third person. Neither prosecution nor defense dared call it a victory. Cabin reopened the truth under the floorboards. Immediately after the trial ended, NPS and FBI were granted full search warrants for the cabin. The cabin was strictly sealed. Drones secretly scanned the surroundings, and the forensic team brought every necessary equipment, because this was the only location all evidence converged on. When Ranger Barrett used a crowbar to pry up the third floorboard from the left corner, where an unusually loose section was recalled by hiker Alex Burton after many nights of remembering, an old metal box appeared. It was dusty, rusted but intact. Inside were 3 items. And a softcover notebook. 2. A woman's scarf. 3. A fabric hair tie, exactly the type Lydia wore on the trip. Helen gloved up and opened the notebook. The first page immediately took her breath away. Lydia's handwriting. Not long diary entries, just scattered lines, quick thoughts, like someone not wanting Evan to know she was worried. Page 3 read, I feel like someone is watching us. Evan doesn't know. I don't want to worry him. But I heard someone step behind the pines when we rested near the small lake. Page 5. That person is there again. I saw a dark shadow between 2 tree trunks while Evan was tying his shoes. The final page written hastily, pen shaking. If anyone finds this notebook, it means I was right. That person is not with us. That person is waiting. Evan thinks I'm imagining it. But I know. Helen read the last sentence over and over. Shaver looked at her, face paler than the wood walls. Lydia knew someone was following. Evan did not know, meaning the third person followed very closely and knew how to avoid Evan seeing him. The journal changed the entire view of the disappearance. Strange hair, the only evidence not matching anyone. During the cabin search, forensics found one more small item under the wooden table. A hair strand. This hair was long, black, stuck under old wood glue, meaning it had been there long before the Turner case. When cross-checked, not Lydia, not Evan, not any ranger, not hiker witnesses, not Frederick Miles, not belonging to any previous cabin owner in records. Records empty. Unclear. Who lived there? National DNA database yielded no match. The hair belonged to someone never in the system. Helen commented, that person lived at the cabin, or frequented it. For many years, Shaver noted, cannot rule out undetermined previous cabin occupant. Journal clues about the true third person. The combination of Lydia's journal, strange hair, Frederick Miles' testimony, forensics Lydia moved, Evan's rope burns, 3D reconstruction, shoe soil, cabin evidence, formed a chilling conclusion. There was a real third person living in RMNP. One Lydia saw. One Evan fears. One Miles saw but did not know the name. And that person may have left the cabin or still be somewhere in the forest. Helen stated directly in the final report. Evan is not the ultimate perpetrator. The person who once lived in the cabin is the missing piece. And that person is unidentified, unfound. Case closed, but only on paper. FBI and NPS opened a separate cabin investigation, but after 3 months found no trace of habitation. The third person either left before Evan was found, or lived like a ghost in forest crevices for years and knew how to evade all search equipment. Evan began probation. He remained silent to the press, did not mention the cabin, did not mention the name he never dared speak. In one private session, Helen asked the final question. Evan, the person who took Lydia, was it the man Miles once saw? Evan did not answer, but his hands shook, and his eyes turned toward the northern forest. Not toward the cabin, but toward the pine ridge so deep light barely reached the ground. Case returns to the beginning. 1 month later, during cabin cleanup, a young ranger reported a small discovery. A single footprint, about 600 meters from the cabin. Not Evan's shoe print, not a ranger's shoe print, not the hikers from the previous day. The footprint headed into the forest, not away from the cabin. Forensics compared samples results. No match to Evan, no match to Miles, no match to anyone in the Turner case file, no match to local residents, no match to any criminal subject in the national database. Helen held the printed results, hands ice cold. Shaver read it and only said, "He's still out there." The Turner case was closed on paper, with Evan receiving a light sentence. But in the heart of Rocky Mountain National Park, finding Lydia's body was not the end. Evan's return was not the answer. The cabin was not the story's conclusion, because Lydia's journal had said from the beginning, "Someone is watching us. Evan doesn't know." And forensics said the final part. The hair strand, unmatched to anyone. The footprint belonging to no one. The true third person never showed his face. Rocky Mountain still guards its secrets. And it seems the person hiding in that forest continues watching, as he did before the Turner case began. The story of the disappearance of Evan and Lydia Turner in Rocky Mountain reflects many very real issues in American life today, particularly how we perceive personal safety, the spirit of vigilance, and the importance of listening to small signals before they turn into tragedy. Lydia wrote in her diary, "Someone is following us. Evan doesn't know." This is not just a story detail, but a powerful reminder that in America, from rural communities to national parks, vigilance must always go hand in hand with action. Many real-life victims of disappearances, harassment, or violence in the United States have also felt something was off before the incident occurred, but they chose silence, not wanting to worry loved ones, or not believing their intuition was important enough. That silence, as in Lydia's case, sometimes becomes the gap that causes the chance to escape to slip away. The discovery of Lydia's body in the glacier and forensic evidence proving she was moved after death also remind us that America's vast natural landscapes from the Rockies to the Appalachian forests are not only beautiful but also places where humans are most vulnerable if unprepared, and lacking safety plans. The fact that Evan carried a piece of cabin wood and had old rope burns on his wrists points to another reality. In American society, there still exist individuals living outside the system, hiding in forests, mountains, or remote areas, with no record anywhere. This does not mean everyone living off-grid is dangerous, but it reminds us that in many parts of America, safety cannot be taken for granted. It must be actively established. The important lesson for American citizens is, share your concerns, don't keep them to yourself, report any suspicious activity, no matter how small. And when venturing into vast wilderness areas, leave a trail of your itinerary, carry tracking devices, and always inform a trusted person of your schedule. Rocky Mountain has shown that a single moment of "I think I'm being followed" can be the boundary between safety and a year lost in darkness. If you want to continue joining unresolved mysterious stories, like the Rocky Mountain disappearance, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any journey uncovering the truth. Thank you for watching. and see you in the next video where we will continue opening the still closed doors of the most mysterious cases.